What if I told you that one decision I made to quit something too soon cost me potentially millions of dollars? And it wasn't a bad investment or a failed business venture. It was a situation where my first job, I felt like it was an impossible situation, and it turned into be the opportunity of a lifetime. I'm Dave, and this is FinishWell, where we talk about finishing strong in every season of life. Today, my story is a personal story, somewhat of a painful story, I guess, and hopefully it's powerful enough to save you from making the same mistakes that I made of quitting something too early. In the movie The Outlaw, Josie Wells, there's a line in there, endeavor to persevere, that I wish I'd understood back in the 1990s. So picture this, I'm 23 years old, graduated from college, and I get what I think is my dream job, working for FlightSafety. It was the premier company that trained pilots, corporate pilots, military pilots, but I mostly worked with the corporate on simulators. They had top of the line simulators, top of the line instructors, they had maintenance training, they had endorsements from all the major corporate aircraft manufacturers, Gulfstream, Learjet, Cessna. We also had simulators for a lot of the big military planes. I got to fly a C-130 aircraft simulator. The cockpit was like the size of your living room, big captain's chairs. I remember the instructor at the time, it was in there. He wasn't teaching me to fly, it was just a demo. But he said, see if you can spot the oncoming aircraft. So I'm sitting there looking and looking. I don't think I see it. He goes, oh, you'll know when you see it. And all of a sudden, I see a little dot. I said, I think I see it. Keep in mind, I'm in a simulator, mimicking going 400, 500 miles an hour or whatever. And this plane coming at me is also going 400 miles an hour. So you see a dot, and all of a sudden, boom, it's big. You just see this big plane just fly right by you. It's scary. So it gives you an idea of how little time you actually have to respond or react actually in the air when something like that's happening. I thought about that when that collision happened in DC, not too far back, between the helicopter and the aircraft. So I had this job with FlightSafety, and I was part of the sales team. I was actually a marketing services rep, which meant my job was to try to generate leads and do some marketing to try to generate business. And as part of the sales team, I was a part of a regional office in Atlanta. We had a sales team that covered kind of the Southeast and also South America, believe it or not. It's kind of a weird territory. So every week, every Monday, we would have a sales meeting. It was a conference call with all the sales team, the VP of sales, the different regional managers, all the sales reps, and then also the EVP of the company and the CEO of the company would be on the call. And the CEO is actually the founder of the company and was one of the biggest shareholders. Now at this time, back in the 80s, this is late 80s, FlightSafety was one of the hottest stocks, especially for a mid-sized business. I think they had about 200 million or so in sales, and they were listed in Forbes magazine for like 10 years running, I think, as one of the top 10 return on investment stocks in the, I guess it was New York Stock Exchange, I believe. All I had to say was great opportunity, fast-growing company, had a stock purchase program plan that was very lucrative, and the sale was a pretty easy sale. I mean, sales were, I'm walking through a Garden of the Gods here, and I don't want to stumble over these rocks, but pilots have to train. I mean, that's a requirement by mostly insurance, and so they had to do annual training. You had to do initial training whenever you purchased a new aircraft, and it was a type that they had not flown before, so they had to do initial training, which was relatively expensive. It was like 2 weeks training, depending on the plane. And then they also, every year, would have to do recurring training. And, they could do it in the aircraft, but you can't really train for all the possibilities in the aircraft itself. And so similar training became very popular. And FlightSafety was the premier company. They actually had endorsements, like I said, from all the different manufacturers. So they built their centers by the places where the planes were manufactured. So like the Gulfstream Center was in Savannah, where Gulfstreams were manufactured. Learjet was in Wichita. Cessna Citation was also in Wichita. Teterboro, I think, is where the Falcon was. By the way, I was there for 2 years. I never could remember all these aircrafts. I've always to point at an airplane, like, what is that? I'll be like, it's a Learjet 35 or whatever. And he's, no, wrong. It's a Falcon, whatever. I just never was good at it for some reason. Everything seemed so good. I like my boss a lot. He was a regional VP. Most interesting guy. I learned so much from him. His name was Tuck, and he knew everybody in the industry, knew the business well, and was just a really sharp guy. So you might ask yourself, what went wrong? Why did I, in less than 2 years, decide to quit and pursue something different? I think part of it was just not really having anything else to compare it to, I suppose. But the kind of starting point was on that weekly call. All the regional VPs would talk, the VP of sales would talk, and then at the end, a lot of times the CEO, the owner, Mr. Yulchi was his name, would pipe in. He had this real kind of high-pitched voice. He was like in his probably 70s at this point, maybe even 80s. He started the company like in his 50s, and had built this successful business. But he was old school, hard nosed, and he would get on there and depending on what happened on the call, if somebody complained about one of our competitors was called SimiFlight. They were based in Dallas, and you complain about SimiFlight. SimiFlight has better pricing. SimiFlight has better simulators. They're color. Ours are not color. Video monitors, whatever. Mr. Yulchi would come on at the end like, you guys just need to sell the service. He would cuss like crazy. I'm not going to do that here, but you need to sell the blankety blank service. Sell the value. Sell the fact that we are endorsed by all the manufacturers. You guys are useless. I'm going to fire all you guys. I don't need this. I don't need you guys. Pilots need to train anyway. They're going to come to us no matter what. So he would say these things. I think that was his way of motivating, looking back now. At the time, being 23 years old, 24 years old, my first job, I was like freaking out. Like, oh my gosh, this guy could just let us go at any time. And then he kept threatening he was going to. So, again, my boss, he was in the military. He was like in the National Guard. He had been in the Marines and flew Hueys and stuff. So, Dobbins Air Force Base was very close to our office. And we used to go out there sometimes for leisure, like for lunch. But a lot of times it was we played tennis with different pilots. A lot of them were friends, but also some of them were potential customers. And we go out to Dobbins and play tennis at lunchtime. So anyway, there was one Friday afternoon. That's when I've been there about 18 months or so. And Tuck never did this. I don't ever remember ever doing it, but he actually said, I'm going to go meet somebody out at Dobbins and play tennis. And so he goes, just in case anybody calls, let them know. So it happened one of those afternoons. Usually on Friday afternoons, nobody was there. It was just me and our secretary. But this time there were a couple of sales reps in the office. It was about 4 o'clock on a Friday. Phone rings. I pick it up. Hear this high-pitched voice I was very accustomed to. I said, "This is David. Thank you for calling FlightSafety. May I help you?" "Hi, David. This is Al Yulchi. Is Tuck Middlebrook there?" I was like, "Oh, no, sir, Mr. Yulchi. He's at the airport," which is somewhat true. He's at Dobbins Air Force Base. He was playing tennis, though. Mr. Yulchi says, "He's not at a blankety blank airport. You have him call me immediately, or I'm going to fire both of your asses." Click. Just like, I kind of sat there, and one of the regional sales guys was next to me. His name was Gordon, funny guy. He looked at me. He had this dry sense of humor. He said, "That was Al Yulchi, wasn't it?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Don't you know better than to answer the phone on on a Friday afternoon. I was like, he says he's going to fire me and Tuck. He goes, don't worry about it. So again, this is way before cell phones and all that. So I'm worried about it. I'm freaking out. I'm calling Tuck's. I couldn't call Tuck on the Air Force Base, obviously, and I couldn't go out there. I called his house, talked to his wife, told her the situation. I get home to my apartment. It was, later, about 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, something like that night, and Tuck calls me, what happened? I told him, and I could kind of tell, he had worked for Mr. Yulchi for, quite a while, so he was used to dealing with him to a certain extent, but he also knew he was volatile. I could tell Tuck was trying to make me feel better, but I could also tell he was a little nervous, so he's like, hey, don't worry about it, and I'll take care of it. I said, okay, thanks. Again, I'm still very worried about it. So Monday rolls around, and he had got a hold of the Mr. Yulchi's son. Actually worked for the company as a treasurer, and then also the VP of sales. So Tuck had talked to Mr. Yulchi's son. Didn't tell him. He just basically said, you know what he was calling about, and he didn't know. So Tuck called the VP of sales, and his name was Jim Wah. And Jim said, he didn't mention me, I don't know what it is, what it's about. So, this is Monday morning by now. So, Tuck's like, what do you want me to do? He goes, just don't bring it up. Wait for the morning sales call. This is a weekly meeting call we had, conference call. And see if he brings up, says anything. And so, I am sweating bullets. So we got to the normal call. All the regional vice presidents talk, VP of sales talks, wait on Mr. Yulchi, he gets on there, says a few words, boom, never says anything about that, wanting to talk to Tuck or whatever, firing us or any of that stuff. So after the call, VP of sales calls, says, hey, something I saw blown over, so just don't bring it up again. We said, no problem. But for me, all I can think about is, okay, I'm like hanging on by a thread here, and it's just not good. So I didn't really realize it at the time, but I was making decisions out of fear than really out of the reality of my situation. And that's just part of being young, I think. So I started looking for another job, and I found one and went on to another opportunity. So you can imagine my surprise. It's about 7-8 years later. I see in the Wall Street Journal again, this is still like 96, 97, so Google and all that stuff weren't around. The internet wasn't prevalent. But I see in the Wall Street Journal, Berkshire Hathaway, Warren Buffett, that's right, the Warren Buffett, buys FlightSafety for $1.5 billion. So I was like, oh wow. That may have been a good opportunity. And then since then, that stock, the rest of the story. I think Berkshire Hathaway stock has gone up like 935% since that time. So anybody that had, I don't know, $7,000 or $80,000, they're millionaires. And Mr. Yulchi actually went to be, I think he was worth $2 billion with the amount of stock that he had, and as it increased. So, like I said, a lot of people there that had been there in the 80s and early 90s, they became millionaires, and the ones that stayed, obviously, as their stock increased, they became millionaires many times over. And this wasn't from, a lottery ticket or any kind of crazy investment or buying Nvidia at the right time. It was just sticking it out with a good company that had such a good future that Warren Buffett recognized it and bought them. And this brings us back to endeavor to persevere. This isn't about being a glutton for punishment or enduring a situation where, we really are being abused. But it is recognizing the difference between, temporary rhetoric and that sort of thing versus a true problem or issue. It kind of reminds me when I used to coach my kids' sports, or my kids were playing sports, and some coaches motivate. You see this on TV, the pros and all that too. They motivate via intimidation, screaming, hollering, yelling. Where other coaches are much more encouraging. And this is kind of off the subject, but one thing I've learned is really different people respond to different ways, and the best coaches know that, and they tailor their coaching to the motivations of whoever they're coaching. Like for instance, one of my sons was he was really good in sports. He was real athletic, and he was really hard on himself. And when he messed up or had some problem, whatever, and the coaches that yelled at him, he didn't go over well. I mean, he did worse. Whereas if you left him alone or gave him some encouragement, he was hard enough on himself where he would respond and usually, put in a better effort or have a better outcome based on that. So again, looking at that situation, I should have been asking myself some other questions. Things like, was the core business sound? Yes, it was a great business, very sound. Again, I mentioned what a good investment it was, and it was nationally recognized. Was I good at my job? I wouldn't say I was great at it. I was new, but I did have, some successes. My biggest success, I remember, and it really wasn't that great, but again, I was in the office. I've always been that. That's one thing. I'm usually, at least, in the office when I need to be in the office. If I go to a trade show, I'm working the booth. I'm standing in the booth. I got another story about that that's great. I'll tell you another time. But so anyway, everybody was out of the office. I was in. Phone rings. Answer it. It's the DEA. Yeah, that DEA. And it's a guy. His name was Jim, and he was over all the pilots for the DEA in Colombia. Yeah, Colombia, like Colombia. And he's, hey Dave, I've got a few new pilots, 7 I think it was, and I got a couple new planes. I need to do a lot of training. So he gives me all the numbers, and I'm adding them all up, and it's like $360,000 worth of training. I am like freaking out. But I'm just taking an order basically. So I take this order, and then Tuck gets back in the office, and I tell him, hey, DEA called, and they set up a bunch of training. It's $360,000. And he's like, oh, great, congratulations. He's like, great job. He never mentioned, he had already talked to this guy several times. He'd been to Colombia, and he knew the training was coming, but he didn't ever tell me that. I found out later. But I did. I tried my best to make calls, and I remember one other funny story I'll tell real quick is we have these FAA lists, where you've got all the plane numbers and the names and addresses of pilots or plane owners and the pilots and their licenses. And so I'm calling somebody in North Carolina, I believe it was, and I asked for the pilot. And they kind of stammer, like, who is this? And I say, oh, this is David with FlightSafety, calling about training. And they say, hang on a second. And then somebody else comes on the phone, says the same thing again. And like, so you're calling about training? And I said, yes. They said, well, he crashed that plane a couple of weeks ago, and he died. And I just was like, oh, I'm sorry. I was hanging up the phone. And I got some of those deals where people in the office, we had like one office, just one room, and like 4 of us had desks in there, so you could hear everybody's conversation. And they could kind of caught on to what was being said. So then, of course, they started heckling me with all the things I should have said. Things like, well, darn, I wish I'd called 3 weeks earlier. Or, do you have his replacement yet? Does he need training? Or could I have a testimonial, please? But anyway, I think I did a pretty good job for being my first job. A couple of questions. Was this a growing industry? Yes, it was a hot industry. And again, FlightSafety was a dominant player in it. And were there opportunities? Absolutely. The guy that I had replaced, he had already gotten a territory, Tennessee, Arkansas. There were constantly territories opening up. And also, FlightSafety was growing internationally, so there were opportunities. And again, the guy that replaced, he ended up eventually taking over like Asia. So he was going all over the world, traveling as a millionaire, I'm assuming. He got to travel the world training pilots. Another big benefit we had is when you get your pilot's license, instead of giving you a company car, they gave you a company plane. It wasn't like a jet or anything, but they'd have Cessnas and twin Comanches if you had a multi-engine license, if you wanted one. And so we'd fly from airport to airport. Anyway, so yeah, it was a great job, great opportunity. And the other thing I should have asked myself is, what's the negative here? Like if this comes true, and they do eliminate the whole sales force, or just I get fired for having to answer the phone on a Friday, what's the worst thing that's going to happen? Meanwhile, on a daily, weekly basis, I'm getting more and more experience. This is my first job out of school, so I had 2 years of sales experience. Again, a growing company. There was not really a downside. I didn't have a problem finding a job once I started looking, because I had a couple years experience. And again, looking back, I did not endeavor to persevere. So I'm telling this story, hopefully to get through any of you guys, that make sure you think about your situation, ask those questions I'm talking about. Is it a great opportunity? Is it a growing company? Where do I see myself, in the future? So a couple of things, again, that I would ask is, number one, is this a people problem or a business problem? And again, the business is going well. I do think it also depends on people problem. How often is this happening? If you're working with somebody who, like on a daily basis, is berating you. I've heard stories, I've never had anybody like that I worked for, but I've heard stories of, managers standing outside the elevator and yelling at people that were late coming into the office, or yelled at them in meetings. And I never really experienced that directly, but if you're having that on a regular basis, that's one thing. But just every once in a while to hear, hey, I'm going to fire you guys. And the business is going well, you're doing well. That's another thing altogether, I think. The second thing to ask is, am I making progress here? Am I building something valuable? Am I creating value for myself, getting extra experience? And if the answer to that's yes, then you should stick it out. So third, what's the worst case scenario? Like I said a minute ago. And what is the worst case scenario? Well, I'm getting experience, but if I get fired, then I've got connections, I've got experience. Whoa, just slipped. So I go out there and try to find another job. And the fourth one, I think this is the one I really overlooked, and that is, what's the best case scenario? And I kind of knew that, I guess, but I just was concentrated on the negative, because I was focused on, hey, is there going to be another territory opening? Could I get a territory? When will that be? Where might it be? How much money could I make? And I just kind of threw all that out when I kept hearing these, just focus on the negative, quite honestly. So here's the deal. This isn't about flight safety and Warren Buffett and all that. It's about, finishing well in life and addressing temporary setbacks and temporary challenges. And how do you deal with those? Everybody's going to face those. And a lot of times, it crosses our mind just throw in the towel and quit. And my suggestion is, do the things I just said. Look at the value you created. Look at the worst case scenario. Look at the overall business. Look at the best case scenario. Based on that, endeavor to persevere. Because that's, part of life, whether it's in a marriage, whether it's in business. We all have to deal with these challenges, and it's how you respond to them. And a lot of times, not quitting is much better than quitting, as I found. when I look at Berkshire Hathaway stock every day and see it's $780,000 or whatever it is now, 737, I don't know, some gigantic number. Oh. So finally, endeavor to persevere. And when I heard that, and I've watched Jesse Wells is probably, between that and A Few Good Men, I've probably watched those movies each, I don't know, 30 times. I don't know how many. I can drive my wife crazy because I can quote quote all the different lines in the movie. Let me see the hairs on the back of that hand. But endeavor to persevere is not a passive action. It's active. I mean, it's doing something that I'm going to face this and I'm going to overcome it. Endeavor. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to try my best, and I'm going to persevere. I'm going to withstand this, and I'm going to come out better for it. This is a Garden of the Gods. This is the backside, but boy, it is pretty here. Very, very nice. It's Pikes Peak somewhere right behind me there, up there. You see it? Pikes Peak, right there. I tried to go to Pikes Peak today. Started driving the road. It's a 19-mile drive, and the traffic was like not moving. I've already been there before, so I was like, came back down. So here's my challenge to you. Is there anything right now that you're thinking about walking away from, giving up on? If so, ask yourself the 4 questions I mentioned. And the main ones, again, I think the main 2, last 2 are, what's the worst case scenario here? What's the best case scenario? And just keep in mind that a lot of times opportunities are disguised as challenges when they come in. So it's how you deal with those challenges and those obstacles that define you, and it oftentimes distinguishes the difference between success and, I don't want to say failure, but failure. So don't let fear drive you to quitting. And sometimes the breakthrough is right around the corner once you've overcome, the breakdown. So thanks for watching FinishWell. If this story resonated with you, please share it. If you have any challenges or need any unsolicited advice, I guess it'll be solicited, but feel free to comment and I'll answer as best I can. Oh, gee whiz. I'm going to break my neck out here trying to video while I'm hiking. These rocks are slippery. Remember, it's not how you start, it's how you finish. Until next time, keep finishing well.